Good evening. Welcome to another Macular and Me webinar from the Macular Society. This is a part of our series for working age people, or not really for working age people. It's about working age focus, really. But we chat about various speakers come on and talk about clinical practices and research and all of those kind of things around all types of macular disease and macular dystrophies. But there's more to life than sight loss, and quite a lot of people with macular disease who are a bit younger still work, or are looking for work. So I like to do every year two different types of webinars, one on welfare benefit, as you know, which I did at the beginning of the year and is available on the old website and the YouTube channel, which I'm plugging already. But I also like to do one on employment. Now this time we're going to do it a bit differently, which I'll explain in a minute. But the house, so I just want to go through the housekeeping first. So we like these things to be as interactive as we possibly can. We're on a full webinar package, so you can't share your screens or unmute yourselves or anything like that. But so the way to communicate with us, and we really want you to do that, because the more interactive we can make this, the better, is through the chat function. So put your questions in there. My colleagues on the call here will keep an eye on that. I've got Patience in the background, who is my support worker PA, so she'll keep half an eye as well. I can hear your questions coming through anyway through my screen reader generally, so we can just keep it going. We can all have a chat. So we're going to talk about employment this evening, but generally I do employment webinars and conversations around perceived barriers to employment for people with macular disease, blind and partially sighted people, from their perspective. But this time we're going to turn it ever so slightly on its head, and we're going to talk about perceived barriers from an employer's perception. So what things they consider when they're looking to employ someone who's disabled or who has sight loss, so blind or partially sighted, because I think we focus an awful lot of time on the barriers, whether perceived or real, from people with sight loss, and they are there and they are real. But today we're just going to try and look at it a little bit from the other direction. So I'm not going to be able to do that all on my own. So I've got some colleagues with me this evening. So I'm going to start off with my very, very dear colleague that I've known for many years, and she works for Support for Sight in Essex, and her name is Zsuzsi Szabo. I always get her name wrong. I've known her for 12 years, and I've probably just done it again. Anyway, good evening, Zsuzsi. How are you?
Hi, Colin. Thanks. I'm good. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me and inviting me for this evening's webinar.
Brilliant, excellent, fantastic. And the next person we've got is Gary Hawkins from Cadent Gas, and he's been very brave. He's been an employer that's agreed to come and chat about from the employer's perspective. So thanks. Evening, Gary. How are you?
Yeah, really well, and thanks for the opportunity. Yeah,
brilliant. Okay,
looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah, great, brilliant. And finally, we have Lee Mercer, who works for an organisation called Even Break, but he's going to talk about their organisation and what they do. But actually, he's got some bit like me. He has lived experience of this, so he's going to tell his story about of employment. So good evening, Lee. How are you?
Evening, Colin. Thank you very much. I'm very well, and looking forward to the webinar.
Perfect, brilliant. Okay, well, what I think we'll do, just to sort of set the scene, sort of, I'm just going to have a quick chat with Zsuzsi about those things we usually talk about, as sort of those barriers and those perceived perceptions for blind and partially sighted people. So, Zsuzsi, so in your role as an employment manager, what are the things that people, blind and partially sighted people that you're supporting, what are the things they tell you about the most, which they believe are their barriers to work?
Well, obviously, one of the barriers is that they feel that employers are not open to employ disabled people, not open to the idea of employing disabled people, and they feel they're going to be discriminated against, and they're never really too sure how or whether they should disclose their visual impairment. That's, I would say, is number one barrier for people.
disclosure is always an issue, isn't it? So always. So when people think about disclosure, so when do we know when the right time to disclose is? When do you think the right time?
No, well, actually, so the Equality Act 2010 clearly states that you don't actually have to disclose a disability to your employer. And can I just say employer here in both occasions? So when you are applying for a new job or when you are unemployed but experiencing sight loss, you don't have to do it. That's clearly stated in the Act. But obviously, if your employer doesn't know that you are struggling or you need some support, they're never going to be able to help you. So at some point, you should say something. When somebody is a job seeker, I usually suggest them to very simply just kind of mention something about their sight loss as they're going for an interview, especially if they might need support while they are at the interview, and then they can disclose it at the end of the interview, at the very last part of the interview. And actually, I had this conversation with somebody, a lady who works for a supermarket. She's going through sight loss. She's been employed for 18 years and she doesn't know what to do. And I simply just asked her, like, do you need support in the workplace? And she said yes. I said, okay, then it's time to disclose it. So until you can manage your workload and obviously you don't have any issues, then there is no need to say anything. But the minute you fear that there needs to be an understanding or actually reasonable adjustment needs to be put in place, then it's time to say something.
Okay, great. So I think you've hit a very good distinct point there. There's two different types of people we're talking about this evening.
Yeah.
They're the people that are in work looking to retain their job after a diagnosis, and those people that are job seekers.
Yes.
And disclosure for both of those different kinds of people needs to be done in a different way. And I've always like we did a video many years ago about disclosure when you were in work, and I think one of the things you described at the time is when you're going to disclose when you're in work, it's about making sort of you said don't have a corridor conversation.
Yes.
So this is sort of making it like a formal sort of, but informal formal meeting. So do you want to just sort of explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so the corridor conversation is what we used to do when we used to work in offices. You know, you go and make a cup of tea and then you say something to somebody, you start having the conversation. But obviously a disclosure is, and you're talking about a very personal thing that obviously most of my clients have maybe an emotional issue with as well. I mean, losing your sight is never a fun thing, and it's not something you would want to do in an environment where it's not confidential and you don't feel safe and supported. So not having a corridor conversation means that obviously you're doing it in an environment when you are the most comfortable, and most importantly, doing it formally is important so it stays on your file, because what you don't want to do is have maybe a situation where you have a really lovely line manager that's really supporting you and you have kind of support in place that not official. The line manager leaves, that you are back to square one having to negotiate your needs with somebody else. But if it's disclosed formally and is written up and maybe reasonable adjustments are summarized and is in your folder or your file at HR, it doesn't matter who comes next, you're going to have those things protected and you don't have to worry about what's going to happen to you as a person with the sight loss if you have a change of management.
Great. And so just the one step on from that, so sometimes you might be asked to go for an occupational health assessment.
Yes.
Should people worry about those?
Not at all. No, not at all. I don't think, I mean, well, probably you and I would agree on that the occupational health assessment, as much as they can be really good, is not necessarily the best thing for sight loss. Obviously, usually what happens, occupational health just kind of advises employers to contact Access to Work, which is the government-funded support in place for disabled people in England or in the UK. So it's just kind of a first step in terms of getting the support in, but it's usually never is the last step. It's just the first step towards.
Yeah, I do agree. And
supporting.
Yeah, and I think that you have to be aware that actually with most occupational health assessments, especially around things like macular disease, you are the expert in the room about your own sight.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. So, and just briefly, so from a job seeker's point of view, so when we're sort of recommending that people job seek, when we're supporting people to look for work, that disclosure can be part of an application if it's beneficial to the job, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, but the advice is that I usually give my clients is don't put it down on your CV or on your cover letter unless you're applying for a job that is for a disabled person and the lived-in experience is a must or is maybe a desirable skill set. If there is just a standard job, then I usually ask them not to put it down. And it's not because employers wouldn't employ disabled people. I mean, you know, I do this for a living, so I wouldn't have a job if that would be the case. Employers do employ people with all kinds of disabilities, including sight loss, but sometimes they just don't have maybe the energy, the knowledge, the inclination to look into what support is available. So unless you are in front of them and able to kind of self-advocate, I think is the best if you don't necessarily mention it. In the application form, you can, I usually say to my clients, it's okay to mention it because the question in the application forms usually are formed regarding the interview. So what do we need to put in place so you can do an interview should you consider yourself a disabled person? So then it's absolutely okay to mention, yes, I consider myself a disabled person. And I have sight loss. I wouldn't necessarily go into registration status. I definitely wouldn't use the word blind because that people just have so many wrong assumptions about what does it mean when somebody is registered blind. And just really state what do you need in order to do the interview. Then maybe if it's a phone call that you can just say, yes, I'm happy to come in. Do I need to do any test? What's the interview really entail? And regarding what you're hearing, obviously you can tell them as much as they need to know so they're going to feel comfortable having you in their offices. The last thing you want is turn up and the employer wouldn't have maybe the chance to look into how they can support you. So give them that either the support, a couple of advice that what you might need, or allow them to have time to look into how they can accommodate your sight loss in an interview, and then go and have the interview. And the very last, very end, when they're asking you if you have any questions, is the best time to bring it up to say, yes, I have some questions, but before I ask them, can I just tell you a little bit about my sight loss? And they usually employers go, yeah, please, great. And if they don't bring up the sight loss, it's not because they maybe haven't realized it or they're not noticing it, they just usually don't know how to bring it up in a way that it come across as compassionate rather than discriminatory.
Brilliant. Okay, that's fantastic. That's really, I don't think we've had any questions in the chat, so but this leads us beautifully on to Gary. So good evening, Gary. How are you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah, fantastic. How are you guys?
Yeah, it's great. Just really thank you for agreeing to join us this evening. It's really it's good of you to take some time of your evening to come and explain to us. So as you've just heard, Zsuzsi and I discussed those perceived barriers from blind and partially sighted people are there. So do you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, or yourself as well, if you like, and just what you've been doing with Blind in Business, and then we can have a chat. And then if you can just tell us some of what you consider that what from your point of view, from an employer's point of view, of what some of those barriers that you may feel are there, and then we can have a chat at the end of that, if you like.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So, good evening, everyone. My name's Gary Hawkins. So my role is for Cadent Gas. We're the biggest gas distribution company in the country. So we operate across London, East Anglia, East Midlands, West Midlands, and North West, servicing 11 million customers. So generally, just to cut to the chase, really, we're the ones that dig the holes and cause the chaos wherever you might go. So as part of my role, I'm in charge of street works and reinstatement. So everything to do with digging the holes out on site. I'm responsible for the compliance, the safety, the stakeholder and escalations around that. So my remit is to work with 36 London boroughs. We call them London. So my reach is from Southend all the way across London on the north side into Buckinghamshire. So we are responsible for obviously repairing gas leaks. We have an emergency service for that. we supply new connections to properties, and we are currently involved in a thing called the 30/30 plan, where essentially we have to replace all cast iron and metallic mains under the ground within 30 metres of a property over the next 30 years. So to give you a bit of an understanding of that, so in London last year, we had to replace circa 390 kilometres of pipework, which is huge, significant, intrusive. And my job is to try and manage the stakeholder perspective and manage the safety and compliance, and obviously development of teams around sites. So as part of the development of this, so my role is heavily involved in street works. And also there is a section within the Equality Act that to say that we should not put someone at danger or harm when walking around our street work site, and we have to cater for everybody. So the progression into blinding business was kind of a natural one for me. Never worked with anyone from sort of blinding business before, anyone with sight loss. Cadent currently don't have anyone that I know with sort of partial sightedness or sight loss. So we met up with the charity a few years ago. They are amazing. I will say that. I don't know if they're on. They've absolutely changed my life as a company, and getting me involved in the charity and trying to develop these students has been a real honour for us as a company and me personally. So essentially in 2022, we decided to take part in some mock interviews to understand a little bit more around the talent pool which exists within blinding businesses scope. And I think that's a really important thing for me to say, is that we haven't reached and cast a net as wide as we should in terms of recruitment, and we are missing out on so much talent. And that became really, really obvious when we started working with blinding business. So essentially we started some mock interviews with me and a few members of my team in London, and we made a bit of a decision. We approached my director and I said, look, I think there's an opportunity here for people to understand, what happens within the gas sector, and to get more students and young people involved in what we do. My industry is not just around digging holes. It's around, the commercial aspect, the legal aspect, stakeholder engagement, political engagement, and all of that good stuff. So we took a couple of students on in 2022, which was amazing. We had a great week with them in London, and we went through a range of topics. So at the end of the year, we kind of reflected, and it wasn't enough for me to get that, to get that feel of what more we need to do as a company to be more accessible. So we sort of shot for the sky this year, and we tried to go for 12, which was a huge challenge and a big load of pressure on blinding business to try and get some students. Happy to say that we've got, I think it's 6, but they're not just based in London. So now what we've done is we've encouraged my colleagues in the Northwest, East Midlands, East Anglia and West Midlands to actively start working with the charity blinding business to bring these students in, give them a week of actual physical work experience, and then discuss their, career options afterwards. The 2 students that I had in this week, we had a young guy called Johnny. He's 21 and he's a materials engineer from Manchester University. So naturally, he was very passionate around our hydrogen sort of rollout. So we're moving him into one of our hydrogen villages to go and have a bit of experience up there. And he's very, very keen to take on a graduate role at the end of it, which is amazing. We had Taryn as well, who was just so bright and so engaging. And we've been supporting him to try and get him some interviews within Cadent to give him that experience as well. For me, he walks into a job if he interviews successfully. And we're hopeful in the next couple of months that he may get something within Cadent. Obviously, we have to follow the interview process, and he's fully aware that jobs are not given in this day and age. Jobs are earned, and he's definitely up for the challenge. So, I guess the reason for me being on it, and I'm really, really interested in this, and I think it's more around. I'm going to be very, very honest about our view of the world in terms of reasonable adjustments, and we based a lot of what we did around the work experience on assumptions, and the engagement wasn't particularly good initially with the students. For example, we did create a slight bit of isolation with the students when they came into our Islington office, because there was a bit of a fear that it was an operational office, and we didn't want to raise the risk of the students tripping or falling over anything. So that was a poor assumption from our perspective, but we will learn from that, and we have done. The biggest challenge, I think, from a company the size of Cadent is the reasonable adjustments around IT and IS and what to do for the best. So our example was, it's a huge hurdle. Our students that we've had in over the last couple of weeks have had to bring in their own laptops. So for me, they kind of don't feel part of the Cadent family. We're having to send them, sort of emails that they can, adapt and sort of read and take in themselves. And I guess from my perspective, I've rattled on obviously for about 5 or 10 minutes now, but I'll be really, really interested to understand how I can improve as a person to look at reasonable adjustments and what's out there for me to learn from, but also, what is there anything differently, Cadent and myself as a business can do to try and be a bit more reactive and a bit quicker to adapt to reasonable adjustments, because I think that will always be an excuse until we rip the plaster off and make it so. So that's kind of where we are currently. I think moving forward, I think a lot of the partnerships that we have with Blinding Business will naturally move into recruitment, and there will be jobs available. And I don't think Cadent are as scared or as dubious as they were around reasonable adjustments, because we've now done this over 2 years. And I think working with Blinding Business have given us that massive sort of encouragement to sort of push on. And the one big thing for me is, going back to my previous point, is around we are missing huge talent in here. I've interviewed the Blinding Business students. I've interviewed people from around the sector, and they are so engaging, and they're so bright, and they would walk into careers at Cadent, and I'm really, really keen to see how that relationship develops. So that's kind of where we are. I hope I haven't rattled on too long. I am from London.
No, great. Actually, it's about halfway through, so you're a little. There's time we set aside for you. So I've got a question. So, when you talk about reasonable adjustments, how do you, as an employer, how do you understand a reasonable adjustment work?
So, from my perspective, I mean, I can only go on them.
No, that's absolutely fine. Talk from your perspective.
Yeah, with the students from the charity. So, essentially, what we did was we didn't have a lot of time last year with the students to actually get ready. So what we did was this year we managed to get some conversations going 2 or 3 weeks before around locations, travel, to getting to and from the station, actually getting access into our offices, name badges, Wi-Fi connections, and then we didn't really want to broach the question around what levels of sight loss some of the students had, because again I think it's it's down to the student to tell us what they need rather than us to make an assumption. So that's kind of how it developed. But I think with the reasonable adjustments that we want to make at Cadent, Colin, I think what we'd like to understand is we want to build open laptops for the students to come in and have direct access into our systems after meeting them, a month beforehand. So when they come in, they're handed a name badge, they're handed a location, and they're handed a laptop. And I think we're a little way away from that yet.
Okay, that's great. I think but you're definitely going in the right direction. Zsuzsi mentioned when we were talking about that self-advocacy part. So from an employer's point of view, if somebody can come up to you with solutions, that's going to be a lot more positive for you than somebody just rocking up with loads of problems, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But I'm kind of a sort of person that loves problems and loves figuring them out really quickly. So it's not really I'll be honest with you. As I say, it's in 2022 when we had the students in, we only found out we literally found out on day what their adjustments would be, and that's kind of the fun part for me, because that puts me under pressure to learn a lot quicker, but it also gives me the opportunity to to hear from the students. As I say, I know reasonable adjustments can take a long time, but it shouldn't, and And that's kind of where I'm getting to. I do get frustrated sometimes that things don't happen as quickly as, you know, perhaps what we need it to.
Yeah, I think that's important to think about, actually, because lots over the years, I know Zsuzsi and I have spoken to a number of people over the years, a number of service users clients, but and you know, around work, and they've got, well, employers must do this, and you say, well, they do kind of have to, but actually it doesn't. It's not like they've got a you know, a magic tree out the back they can pull it all off of. There is, you know, you have to be a bit patient. So it is, for me, reasonable adjustments are not a negotiation, but they are definitely a conversation. And Zsuzsi and I'll talk about a little bit later on about access to work, which is when things are beyond a reasonable adjustment. But from a starting point, as an employer, you understanding what people need as a reasonable adjustment, and having the opportunity to put them in place is a really good thing. I mean, I commend you guys for supporting a blind in business in this excellent piece of work that they've been doing, because they were struggling to find employers, and to find somebody like yourself and Cadent to support them, they must have been jumping for joy. I'm sure they were.
Oh, Colin, they're stuck with me now. That's the problem for them. So, yeah,
that's great. I know Zsuzsi's eyes have lit up, by the way. I don't, you know, she's, you know, a few hundred miles away from me, but I know she's smiling in her head, so she'll be asking for your email address.
I have Gary's email. I have Gary's email address, so he's going to get an email tomorrow.
As well. I'm also in Essex as well, so don't worry. Let's go grab a cup of tea sometime. We'll have a chat.
Yeah, I will email you tomorrow if that's okay. I already have somebody in mind, but that's one question. You keep talking about the people that you're supporting, the students. Are you interested to hear about somebody who actually worked in the sector for a number of years but has sight loss now?
Yes. As I say,
email tomorrow morning.
No, definitely. Wow, that happened quickly. Thank you, Zsuzsi.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I will email you. Thank you. That's
wonderful.
it.
Thank you.
Well, that's really
Thank
great.
you.
So that's really positive. So we'll come back for a fuller conversation just at the end. So, but I'm aware that Lee's been sitting there very patiently. So hi, Lee. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Colin.
Okay, great. So that's a very positive story from Cadent, isn't it, what they're up to? So
Definitely.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then what you've been up to, and then perhaps we can all come back together and have a chat about employment and from employers' point of view, even based with the role that you do as well now. So if I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, certainly. So hi everyone, I'm Lee. I lost my sight pretty much completely back in 2018. In a very, very short space of time, I went from having relatively normal vision to sort of nothing at all. And it was very drastic. It was quite scary at the time. It wasn't something I had expected. It wasn't something that I'd been particularly warned about. So when it hit, it wasn't something that I was really prepared for. And I was actually at work when it happened. So it was a big shock to everyone, to myself, to my colleagues, to my manager at the time. And very quickly, stopped me from doing the job that I was in at the time. And for the first year or so, I was very much concerned with the medical side of everything, of spending lots of time in theatre, having lots of different procedures and operations performed in order to, repair and save as much as they possibly could, to the point where they decided that they had done all that they could do and that I would get my registration as someone who was severely sight impaired. This was probably at the start of about 2019, so the first couple of months in 2019 when it was registered. So from that point on, it was about adapting and finding out, how I was going to navigate in this world with this new perspective. What I could do going forward. I'd spent a lot of time during that previous year, very much up and down, worrying about what I'd lost, what was going to go wrong next, whose fault it was. Was it my fault? Was it a condition? Was it a failure of medical people? It's lots of emotions flying around, lots of stages. But at the start of, following that registration, it was very much moved on to looking at where I could go, what I could do. I must still be able to do something. There must be loads and loads of people that live with this. So I had to sort of get on with it and, see where I could go. And I started talking to lots of organizations, charities, support organizations about what I could do, what was out there, what was available. And one of the first things, one of the higher things on my list was getting back into that work environment, was getting back to a way where I could contribute, I could get back to an office or my colleagues, or doing the job that I'd been doing for so long at that point. And so along the way, this is where I was introduced to Zsuzsi through Support for Sight. And, we attempted to go back to my employer at the time and to have those conversations about support and about adjustment and about making the environment and the workplace accessible for me to return to my job. Now it was a fairly protracted process. There was lots to do. There were questions about the technology, about the access, about moving around in the space, the health and safety questions, sort of sickness and disability questions, everything that generally comes up. The difference between Gary's story about what they're doing at Cadent and my previous employer was that my previous employer just wasn't able to overcome any of those barriers. They weren't able to make those adjustments. They weren't able to put those adjustments in place in order to allow me to return to the job that I was doing. So despite lots of pushing on our part, myself and with Zsuzsi through Support for Sight, we weren't able to return me to that environment. So I ended up leaving that role under medical grounds. And then lockdown started. So, I almost, got out just in time, because just before everybody else started being on, furlough and working out the new landscape of working from home and, all this remote access, I was out, and for a little while it was enough. But quite soon I realized that need was still there. I still needed something to do with my day other than sitting indoors and watching something, like listening to something on the television, or cleaning the house for the umpteenth time that week. There must have been something else. My employer can't have been representative of the space and everyone in the area. So I started looking for work again. So I went back into that cycle as a candidate, looking at applications and job descriptions, and very much, with this new perspective. And as much as I was being positive about everything I had achieved up to this point, everything I had support with from various organizations, there was still that question in the back of my mind about what was I going to be able to do? What was I going to be able to achieve? And at what cost? What would I need to put in place? When would I need to talk to employers about my sight loss? And I know that as I looked through lots of these applications, there was lots of times when I would look down a list and think, yeah, I could do that. I could do that. Oh, they're asking me to do that. I don't think I could do that very easily. And I would put that application aside and I would move on. There wasn't the confidence there. There wasn't the level of, belief there to go for a role where I would have to engage with that employer and ask them, could you just change this bit? Or would I be able to do this in a different way? Is there an adjustment you could make? I was very much looking for that. I can do 100% of this role, and I think I can do it well before I will apply for it, which just made it harder on myself, basically, because, the roles that I went for that suddenly went down from, a decent amount to hardly any. And it was a little while working through until I found something that I really felt really spoke to me, really felt like I could make a difference in the space and, you know, to people that I was working with. So in the middle of 2021, I started working for my current employer, who are called Even Break, and it was a fantastic coming together of the skills that I already had in. I used to work in financial admin and client administration, and it brought that together with disability, with this new area of my life, this new thing that I was involved in. And what we do is we are a social enterprise who support disabled candidates who are looking for new or better work to get back into the workplace. And as a company, we support those candidates to be as confident and as prepared as they can. But we also work with employers on the other side to make sure that they are prepared and they understand and they are confident and comfortable with making those adjustments, with asking those questions, and with taking on those candidates and supporting them in the best way so that they can thrive in that environment. And we bring those two parties together on our job board online at Even Break, and, you know, hopefully find a lot more people, a lot more jobs with employers who are open and inclusive and willing to go that extra mile to make that experience as smooth and remove as many of those barriers as they possibly can. And that's, you know, led on to so many new things, so many new opportunities. I've met so many different people from a whole range of areas, of companies, of groups who are starting on this journey or who are part way along but need some advice about the best way to approach this, you know, this disabled candidate, you know, hiring, and, you know, really are willing to come to us and talk about the best thing they can do and close the disability employment gap that we know is there, and just make sure that we level that playing field. And it's something that I hope that I'll be doing for, you know, a good long time, and we'll see, you know, the increase in people getting work and people understanding what it is to adjust and accept people with all sorts of disabilities into the workplace as we go forward.
Brilliant. I just want to ask, because obviously we're looking at this as a bit more from a employer's perspective. I mean, your story is, I'm sure, resonates with lots of people with who've had an acquired sight loss a bit later on, and their employer has been less than helpful, he says diplomatically. But in this new role, you've got this opportunity to speak to employers. So what are the kind of things they tell you? Are they similar to Gary's concerns? So what are those things that they're telling you about employing somebody with sight loss or a disability?
Yeah, some of the things that Gary raised are some of the things that are most common amongst the employers that I speak to every day. A lot of it is about confidence, is about the right terminology. What can we say? What should we say? When should we offer something? And there are times when, in order not to say the wrong thing, companies won't say anything. So you have someone, a hiring manager, sitting in an interview, and they think, "Oh, I won't mention the sight loss. I won't ask a question because I don't want to offend someone." The problem is that doesn't help the candidate and that doesn't help the company.
No.
Because no one then has the answer. No one has that conversation about what would work best, and no one is able to do anything about it. So that confidence about understanding what they can do and what they can say is one of the biggest barriers, I think, that employers face. It's being comfortable enough to approach that candidate and to say, you know, what can we do? What do we need to do to make your experience the best that it can be?
Yeah. I mean, Gary said that. So Gary, so you like to talk about the elephant in the room. That's kind of what Is that, would that be right as well, Gary? If you can talk about the sight loss and those issues and those barriers, they kind of start to fall, well, they start to go away and at least move to one side.
Yeah, I think there will always be a sense of nervousness, particularly around having conversations. It was amazing, by the way. Honestly, you blown my presentation out of the water there, so thank you for that. I know I should have gone lastly, but I was going to ask the biggest challenge, and I think I'm not speaking on behalf of Cadent, but I know it is prevalent, is the actual commercials around reasonable adjustments, particularly around IT and IS. Is that something that gets raised, or is part of this whole recruitment sort of issue that comes up? Because I've noticed, you know, we've had a look at IS and IT options in terms of, you know, what we need to do, but there's always a lack of understanding, I think, about what we do, how we do, and, you know, who can we do to get advice to sort of make it work.
Yeah.
Is that
Can you just explain what IS is?
Sorry, it was IT in it. Yeah, essentially, yeah. Computers, yeah.
And that technical side of it is one of the, you know, the top end of, you know, that sort of adjustment scale. You know, there can be things that are extremely small and extremely quick, and that could very quickly help a candidate to do better in whether it's an interview situation or whether that's a day-to-day work situation. But when you get to IT, that's when that starts coming with a price tag. That's when it starts coming with a little bit of expertise, a little bit of knowledge about what would be best. And that's where you have to, a lot of the time, you have to get companies involved, people like Access to Work, as has been mentioned, who, you know, are there to provide some of that financial support to companies to help them put these best things in place that they can use, because it is expensive. I myself used a screen reader, and, you know, the cost of that was something that I had never even needed to think about in my previous role. It wasn't something I was aware of. But, you know, now seeing what it is and seeing how much of a difference that it makes to my job. I mean, it literally, without it, I couldn't do my job.
Yeah,
but,
I think it's important to, I mean, this is a good point, actually. So reasonable adjustment will get you so far, and that conversation with the employer will get you so far. But then there are things that are slightly beyond the reasonable adjustment and those costs that you talk about,
yeah,
you've both mentioned. So, and that's where Access to Work comes in. So Zsuzsi,
yes, Colin.
So Access to Work, we know what Access to Work is, a government scheme, isn't it? So,
yes.
so it's the, you know, it's the bane of our life. When it works well, it's great. When it doesn't, it's horrible.
Well, but, you know, I have to pay the mortgage, to be fair, so it's fine. You know.
Yeah, exactly. So did you just want to give us a little just brief overview of,
I'll
do this quicker than I can. So
yeah, really quickly, yes, of course. Can I just go back to one point that Gary raised in terms of reasonable adjustment? Just I nearly came in when he was talking, but I managed to stay quiet, so well done me. But what I wanted to say, Gary, just really quickly, when I did the reasonable adjustment and the disclosure part with my clients, there is 4 points that I asked them to think about. It's 4 points mainly, and I always ask them to think about the environment they're going to go into, and then do like kind of a no more than 2 minutes kind of chat with the employer when they're disclosing their disability. So the 4 points and an extra one. The first thing is tell the employer what the disability is, what is the name, what does it mean, how much they can see. That's very, the sighted people always like to know how much somebody with the sightless can see, and also whether they are under any treatment, and if they are under any treatment, what does that mean in terms of, you know, future sickness, whether they're waiting for an operation or something. So that's kind of half a minute. And then the remaining minute and a half, what I ask my clients to think about from the employer's perspective, and without, and they need to do this so the employer doesn't make assumptions whether they are bad or good. What they need to think about is tell the employer how they're going to access information. So what their appropriate format in accessing information in whatever format the information is. So that can be an email, can be print, can be a book, whatever. What their mobility like in terms of in and around the office, what health and safety implications the employer should maybe consider, or maybe they don't need to consider anything because they're going to be fine, and how overall their productivity would be. So that's the 4 points that I get my clients ready for the interview to disclose their disability from the employer's point of view. And what I mean by it, like if somebody goes and works in an office with 2 other persons, the health and safety is not an issue. But obviously if somebody applies for a job in a school where they have 400 children under the age of 12, then it's going to be an issue. So that's something that maybe you can include in your interviews, is asking them how you're going to access information, how is your mobility, you know, how's your productivity will be, and what do I need to consider health and safety wise as an employer. So that's just a quick one that I wanted to come in with. But obviously when we have a chat, maybe sometime, you know, have that cup of tea, then we can talk about it more. Sorry, I just had a mosquito bit my arm, sorry. And then going back to access to work quickly. So access to work is there to support disabled people with adjustment in the workplace. Really simply, there is 3 ways usually they support visually impaired people. Number 1 is assistive technology support. So that kind of usually happens after an in-work-based assessment, when the person is able to speak to somebody who's experienced supporting people with sight loss, and they will be able to discuss their needs in terms of what they would need in the workplace in order to access information. So that's assistive technology. Can be softwares, can be something like a magnifier, whatever is would be appropriate for the individual. The second thing that access to work can help people with is a taxi or transport support to and from work, but let's call it a taxi. So you can have a taxi because obviously getting to and from work, commuting and using public transport is sometimes just not suitable for a visually impaired person, especially rush hour. And the last thing that somebody can apply for who is visually impaired is have a support in place, having a support worker who is usually somebody that can just enable the person to 100% fulfill their job description that may be unable to do due to their disability. The guidelines with access to work, which is written wrong in their own guidelines, but the official guidelines should be is that you can have a support worker providing you can do up to 20% of your job description. You can have somebody for 20% helping you, but not 20% of your working hours is 20% of your job description. So but anyway, I won't go into access to work because probably would be here till midnight. So yeah, and it's a great support once it's in place. Kind of takes a bit of a time these days to get through. And just to let you all know, whoever is listening, that when you are applying for a new job, so you are going to a new employer, then they don't have to pay anything. Everything you need is provided to you for free. So employers don't facing any extra cost by employing a disabled candidate.
Perfect.
Is that enough, Colin?
Yeah, honestly, that was brilliant. I mean, I just waffle on for hours about access to work.
I know. Shall we do a
webinar
or like a webinar weekend?
The thing I want to double back to, though, which is quite important from an employer's perspective, which is what we're talking about this evening, is that workplace assessment. So what tends to happen is that lots of blind and partially sighted people know the kit they like and the kit they want, or maybe they don't. Maybe they're new, it's a new. But on the most part, most blind and partially sighted people know what they want. But sometimes the kit they use at home is not appropriate for the workplace.
Yeah.
So that workplace assessment, provided for free from DWP, is a really good starting point. So, for example, Lee, you found out about about screen readers and how accessible and usable they can be.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, because they are, aren't they? Once you've got your head around them, they're a bit of a bugger to learn how to use.
They are. There's definitely a learning or a relearning process for, you
Yeah.
know, as someone who used computers a lot, you know, in my personal life, in my work life, to then get back to a point that was, you know, almost at square one. It was like, okay, I need to start this all over again. I mean, the first thing I need to do was learn how to actually type on a keyboard. You know, because despite working in office for many, many years, I was still at the 2 fingers jabbing at random letters stage of typing. So once I had that down, it was then this whole new way of navigating. And now, like, you know, it's you know, a lot of things are quicker. There are shortcuts I can take. There are methods I know of how to work things. But when you first get into that, yeah, it is a little bit daunting. It is a little bit, you know, there's a lot there and it's a bit complex, but
it's a steep learning
it
curve.
is a bit. It's
Yeah, exactly. I've just learned to use VoiceOver on a Mac, and I've been using JAWS screen reader for 30 odd years. So actually learning how to use another screen reader, which is completely different, was, as I say, a learning curve.
yeah.
So but these workplace assessments, you know, I have known companies go approach access to work, or the client approaches access to work, the candidate, and some companies, bigger companies, will look at the report that's provided by Access to Work, and it will recommend loads of kit and equipment, especially software, maybe some clever gadgets and gizmos, handheld magnifiers, other stuff. And then the company's it's been quite a wealthy company, so they've just purchased it. Doesn't happen very often, but actually just speeds everything up. So, but I think from an employer's point of view, knowing that workplace assessment is there, so really encourage your candidates, I think, is a good piece of advice. If you're going to offer somebody a job with a start date, that is the point that the person can apply for access to work, make that application for access to work. And new starters, even though there's still slight delay, they are, for new starters, it's coming through slightly more quickly. So
I just had a client, sorry, we applied on Monday, she had a phone call on Friday.
Perfect.
So the new starters are actually getting through really fast now.
Yeah. So that workplace assessment, workplace is the quicker that can be done and put in place, the cleaner and smoother the start time for that new employee can be dealt with. So, but again, I'm sure Zsuzsi would have a chat with you about that as well. So anyway, I think we've had no questions through the chat at all, but we've still managed to clamber around to our time. So you know, I've honestly, it's flown by. It's been a really good chat, really good conversation. So Zsuzsi,
yes, Colin,
I'm going to close it. So I'm going to thank you very graciously for joining us this evening.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, I mean, your knowledge and everything. So I really recommend anybody that lives in Essex who has some pipe loss, come and see Zsuzsi, because she really is good at her stuff.
Thank you.
Oh well, you know, I have to say nice things about you occasionally.
Well, sometimes you do.
Gary, again, really thank you for joining us. Your insight and input has been invaluable for this conversation.
Honestly, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for all your support and help. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, and you honestly, please just you've got a really great relationship with Blind in Business, but you know, I know I speak for Zsuzsi and myself that you can reach out to both of us if you feel that would be of benefit.
That's very kind. Thank you.
And Lee, finally, thank you for being so open about your journey and where you've got now sounds fantastic. So
Of course,
thank you for joining as well.
It is, you know, it's strange that, you know, had I not obtained my disability, my sight loss, it would have been something that I never would have found. And you know, but now I almost wouldn't change it. You know, the people that I work with, the candidates and the companies that we support, you know, I love what I do now. And you know, getting there might have been up and down a little bit, but through the help of people like Zsuzsi and other organizations, you know, I'm in a really good place, and you know what we're doing, you know, is really, you know, I really believe in and really proud of what we can achieve, I think, with Even Break and, you know, in my own sort of out of work life. So, you know, it's been a journey, but it's going well.
Well, what a really positive note to finish on. That's great. Really great. I'm
Lovely.
really pleased. So just leaves time for me to thank everybody that came along. And just to tell you that next month we're going to talk about laser treatment for people with inherited retinal disease. So from a consultant who is going to come and do a presentation about that. That'll be a really interesting session, actually. That's going to touch on laser treatment, just not for DMO and macular disease, but that might extend into other areas of different types of retinal disease as well. So it could be very interesting. Oh, no, not could, will be very interesting. That is on the last Thursday of every month, as always, starting at our new time of 7 o'clock. Anyway, so really, really thank you for coming along this evening. This will be available on our YouTube channel and our website within the next week or so, along with all our other previous webinars that we've hosted over the last couple of years. Anyway, so thanks very much for coming, and good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye.